I'll say I
Oh,
recorded
yeah.
a podcast earlier today and my internet was a little funky. If it does that again, if I turn my video off just for a moment, usually that helps.
Oh, yeah.
So that
No
won't impact you too
problem.
much if I do that. Okay.
The message is more important. I do have YouTube, but
Hmm.
that's really just for like library. It's not like I
Okay.
promote the channel or anything, but people like to see who they're
Yeah, I like
listening
to see
to.
you. That's
So,
yeah, I liked watching it. So
yeah, and our audience likes to say, okay, who is she talking to? I want to see her face. And so they like to see our guests' faces. And so they're like, oh, you have lovely guests. I said, I know. All right. Well, welcome. Christine V. Davies, right? It's Davies, right? Not
you could
Davis.
just say Christine
Okay.
Davies. Yep.
Christine Davies, or Christine D, wears many hats in her professional life, all aimed at providing emotional and spiritual support. As a writer, she enlightens others on spiritual practices and shares insights from her work as a hospital chaplain, aiming to normalize grief and encourage living in the moment. Christine also serves as a spiritual director, deeply engaging with individuals to discern divine moments in their lives and helping them develop personal rituals, especially those moving away from traditional religions. Additionally, she is an ordained progressive Presbyterian minister known for her casual and sometimes irreverent tone, a cognitive behavioral therapist, Reiki practitioner, and seminary professor. Wow, you do it all, don't you, Christine?
I'm not good with downtime. I like to stay busy. So
I hear you with that. Oh my goodness, because the more busy I am, I feel like I'm being more productive in life. And it's a good busy. I won't overwhelm myself. I'll put boundaries, of course, but I just like to be busy and learn as much as possible because I think this world, there's so much information out there, but sometimes false information. And I really have to go within, hence my podcast show, to learn and then go within and then go above
hmm.
and beyond. So I'm so excited to have you on my show. Could you just share with the audience what got you into becoming a chaplain?
Yeah, so it's not a usual job. Most people don't know about it, certainly not at career day, in the kids' schools. Even my kids are still somewhat confused about what I do for a living. But I grew up going to our local Presbyterian church, and I really took to it as a kid, much more so than, the rest of my family did. And I was a pretty precocious child and was convinced from a young age that God was real and present and that God wanted me to help people. And so I was trying to figure out how do I help the most people in my life? And I thought, oh, I should be a medical doctor. And my mom is a nurse, so I think she was really pushing this dream. And I worked for some time on a ambulance as an EMT. So I was providing kind of transport to the hospital for patients that were going through medical crises. And it was really in doing that, although I could do minor things, I could, wrap wounds and give oxygen. It was really being in the back of the ambulance, holding people's hands while they were suffering, while they were saying, I don't know why this is happening, or just crying with no words, that I felt like that was a healing presence for them. And I felt really compelled to do that type of work. And then around the same time, I was having medical crises of my own. So I wound up eventually getting diagnosed with generalized epilepsy. But it took a lot of time to get to that diagnosis. And I was in and out of hospitals and saw so many doctors and lost a little bit of faith in the discipline of medicine, which is very funny now that I work in a hospital. And it was around that same time that we had an associate pastor at our church who was pretty new, who just took me out for dinner and talked to me about what it was like to go through this from an emotional and spiritual perspective. And I recognized later, I'm like, oh, that was healing. I was getting spiritual care, and I felt much more listened to in that experience than I did, in any of my hospitalizations. And so I really thought about that there's different ways to heal people and different facets to what we need in terms of spirituality and in terms of our health. And so that's what led me to do that for other people in the hospital that are going through some really intense experiences, be it a new diagnosis, be it saying goodbye to a loved one. And if I can make their time there just 1% better by being a listening presence and hopefully bringing them some comfort. That's what I really love to do as my role. And then Some of the other things I do teach on the side about how to be with people, about what to say, what not to say, all those types of things. And then I also have a private practice where I'm seeing people who aren't in crisis, but over a span of time who are wanting to really delve more into their spirituality and talk about what it means for them and practices that they might try.
That's so beautiful. Yes, I was just sharing with you earlier that my experience with the chaplain, because I didn't know the difference between minister, reverend, chaplain, and I know they're all connected somehow, but I didn't distinguish like exactly who they were. But my first experience goes back in 2017, where, I have tried multiple times to try to quit my addiction, after relapse. I went through rehab, counseling, AA, 12 step, the whole shebang, and nothing worked. And it wasn't until I started reaching out to God because I was like, okay, what gives? I have to surrender here because there's nothing else that's helping me. And it was in the moment in my vehicle that I was like so I felt despair, worthlessness, and just hopeless, right? And I was like, God, I cannot do this without you. Can you please help? I do not want to live like this anymore. Well, sure enough, 2 weeks later, I wound up in the hospital, thinking, oh my goodness, is God mad at me now? What's going on? So I was in the hospital, but it was interesting because, this is my youngest son's father. We had broken up because of my problem, and we decided that he was going to care for our son at the time, and I was going to move into a studio. But during the move, I really developed a really difficult and I guess a lot of pain in my abdomen area and in all of my back, and I just didn't understand. And I said, well, make sure your phone is on because I may need you to take me to the hospital because I don't feel good. And I kept on throwing up. It was really a horrible experience. So that morning I had enough. I didn't sleep. I was in excruciating pain. I didn't want to call 911. I knew he was not too far. And so he was able to pick me up. He's, well, what hospital do you want to go to? I said, I don't know. I just moved here to San Jose. I don't know where many places are over here. I said, let me Google it real quick. And then something drew me to a faith-based hospital. Mind you, I was kind of dabbling with church here and there. I wasn't really spiritual or religious, like I mentioned to you before, but I was like, okay, let me go to this faith-based hospital, right? So I went there and was dropped off, and I needed to be there for like a week in order for me to recover. Well, during my time, no one visited me, by the way. It was really me, myself, and God. And then, of course, the care providers there, who bless their hearts, they're really sweet. But then I did understand why a chaplain was coming into my room. And it was this Indian lady. She was so sweet. She was like wanting to talk to me and wanted to know where I'm at with God. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what's going on, but I'm here for a reason. I had prayed about this. And then she's like, well, let me pray over you. And she'll let me know if you need anything. So I really had a nice experience with that. So I left that hospital never drinking again. That was my sobriety day. It was September 7th or so of 2017. I changed and I started then going to church. I'm like, well, let me check out church. And then I started, okay, I like church, but the energies were kind of clashing with me. And I was kind of really trying to seek something different. And I actually met my husband at church because we did street ministry together, which was very nice. And so we started going to another church after we got married. And I'm like, I don't know if I like this church. And he's still going, but my spirituality is different. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is different. There's religion and there's spirituality. Can you go ahead and explain, in your opinion, the difference between the two? Because my husband and I kind of wrestle with this a little bit, but we all both have our own journeys.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I love that story that you just shared.
Thank you.
Most people have no idea what a hospital chaplain is. And you have this story of this person that was really pivotal in your journey. And I love hearing that because often when I'm with individuals in the hospital, we just see them for a snippet, one day at a time and never know what their life is going to bring later on down the road. And usually we see them on their most vulnerable days. So it's lovely that you have this story of healing and recovery that largely stemmed from that encounter. And you ask a great question. What is the difference between religion and spirituality? I get that question all the time, especially as sometimes I walk into a patient's room and they're like, the chaplain, well, I'm not religious. I said, that's okay. You don't have to be. I'm not the church police. You don't have to tell me, about your background. And what I really focus with them on is what is weighing on your heart today? What is meaning the most for you today? And I explain, I'm an extra layer of emotional and spiritual support for them, and however they want to utilize me. So, religion is an agreed upon set of rituals and practices and beliefs that's held by a community, and it's usually for the sake of communing with the divine. So, some would call that God, some would call that more than one God, but it's everyone gets together and they're practicing certain beliefs and rituals. Spirituality is how do you connect to and explore the world within you and around you? And how do you make meaning and find transcendence? So we all have spirituality. Some people don't like the term, they don't like claiming it, but we do. We all have a sense of spirituality for ourselves. And for some, religion helps them get to that spirituality. For some, religion is one piece of their spirituality. And for some, it's completely separate. And religion has been problematic for all sorts of reasons, and there's all sorts of toxicity. So I completely understand that. So it's really about figuring out, okay, what am I needing from religion, or from in your specific example, from this church, or what am I not needing? And if there's something that you can find elsewhere, or maybe it is a change of worshiping community. Another way I like to get people to think about different types of, their spirituality is that it's a connection with ourselves, right? So that's one part of it. It's a connection with others or community. And then it's a connection with the divine and the transcendent. So we kind of need those three things to all be working together to have a sense of spirituality. And so if I'm feeling disconnected from myself, and a lot of our hospital patients are feeling disconnected with themselves, right? When you're in the hospital and you're not knowing, why you're there and what's going on with you, you feel like your body's betraying you. You can't, trust your body. You don't feel kind of like yourself. So that's one place of disconnect. Community, that's something, it could be your family, it could be your friends. We all kind of went through what it was like to be disconnected from community in the midst of the pandemic when we weren't with people physically. And then the divine or the transcendent, for some people, that is going to be God. For others, it's going to be nature. And it depends on what that relationship is like. Sometimes that relationship feels really strong. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes a lot of patients I see are angry at God for all sorts of reasons. And so, it's talking through that. So I invite people to think about, okay, what is the area of those three that I feel most connected to? And what is the invitation to maybe feel connected in a different way, in a different realm?
That is beautifully said, and it reminds me of my experiences when I was in the midst of my drinking and I went to church and I don't know, something came over me. I started crying, 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 crying. I'm like, okay, this is where I need to be. And I did need to be there because that's how I met my husband, plays a big, huge role in my evolution, my growth, whatever you want to call it. Because he's amazing and I love him. This is what I feels like a true marriage is, because I was married before. That didn't work out because of the drinking and everything. But I noticed as I was learning more about myself, and I felt very connected to the divine, where like every day I'm always talking to God. People like you said can call it universe, love, whatever, but I say God because this resonates with me mostly. And I just feel like I just have that constant relationship. But you're right about the church has helped me build that community, because that's exactly what I needed at that time, because the opposite of addiction is connection. And I needed that connection, and whether it be with women's Bible study or whatever. But I noticed something, Christine, like every time I was meeting certain women in my life, whether it be Bible study or somewhere in church, they played a big pivotal moment in my life. And they helped me get to the next level. And in other words, like a spiritual teacher covertly or so. And it's just an amazing experience. So you're absolutely right. Like I have to go to like church to then discover more about who I am as a spiritual being. And then I'm okay to go to church. It's no problem. It's just some of the energies, because I'm very intuitive now too. Now that I've been connected, now that I'm sober minded, I'm very intuitive. And I noticed that I can sense energies more like what you call it empaths, right? So absorb their energy and I don't know how to necessarily get rid of it. Yeah, I
Mhm.
do a lot of breathing, I do a lot of walking, do a lot of meditation and prayer. And that always helps. But that's why I don't really go to church because there's a lot of toxicity, like we were talking about there. And I actually wanted you to talk a little bit about some things that we can recognize within the type of like church environment where we're like, oh, this doesn't seem right to me.
Mhm. Yeah, and church doesn't have to be your only source of community either. So if there's needs that you're not getting met for that connection, you may try other things as well. Sometimes for some people it's volunteering,
Yeah.
others it's a bowling league. So it doesn't have
Yeah.
to all be one place. Just like a lot of therapists will say, like your partner shouldn't be everything, right? That you might need a best friend, you might need a work wife, you might need all of these things, but if you put everything on one individual, that won't work out well. I think sometimes the same can be true for our churches or our houses of worship. We really want to get what we can out of that, but recognize, I may have other needs that aren't going to necessarily be met in that place. And to your point about the toxicity that can occur, a lot of individuals that I work with in my private practice, I would say, would characterize themselves as the faith of their childhood no longer fits for any number of reasons. It may be that the authorities, and in a lot of cases, it was the men leading the churches, maybe the things that they were saying were more abusive in nature, more judgmental, had some misogyny within it. So I have seen a lot of that over time. And then unfortunately, I have also bore witness to a lot of people who had been victimized by not just verbal behaviors, but also, terribly abusive situations of power and of sexuality. And I would encourage people to be able to claim that. I think that's really the first step toward healing, is to acknowledge the impact that the church may have had on you. And even if it was not something as severe as that, it may have been, oh, this lady gossiped about me and this really, hurt because this was supposed to be, a deacon in my church. And to name that, and then to also recognize that doesn't mean you then have to not have a spirituality whatsoever. Because a lot of the people I work with were hurt by the church with good reason, but then think I have nothing else. Like I have to turn my back on the church completely, and I have no spirituality as a result. So I like to tell them you don't have to throw it all out.
Mhm.
You can, and a lot of what I do, I compare to having like a ball of yarn that's all kind of knotted together, and that might be someone's, spiritual experience. And what we need to do in spiritual direction is we often kind of untangle it a little bit slowly and look at it and say, okay, is this piece serving us anymore or not? Do I want to keep this or do I want to, cut this away? And it's going to look different in the end because we're really um, deconstructing one's beliefs and figuring out, what do you believe right now? And that's another instance that I see. Sometimes people are coming to believe something, a value or a belief that's not in line with either the congregation or the house of worship they grew up with or where they happen to find themselves, and being able to give credence to your own internal intuition as a source of power and truth.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. That's perfect. No, it'll be definitely clear for our audience as well, because I do get some questions about that always. And I think you're the first one actually able to talk about it. So thank you. Like, hey. Going back to spiritual practices, can you share some spiritual practices that have been particularly transformative in your own life and lives of those you have guided?
Absolutely. So, um, I'll share maybe two or three different ones that I would invite people to try on. A lot of times when I'm working with people, they'll say, "Oh, I wanna be more spiritual. I know I should meditate for an hour every day or read scripture for 20 minutes." I said, You don't need more on your to-do list that you're going to feel guilty about not accomplishing. And, who has an extra hour a day, right, to be able to do these things? So I am a big fan of what a lot of productivity experts called habit stacking. And I think we can do that with the things that are already in our day. We can really infuse them with more intentionality to be a spiritual practice. So, for instance, I love coffee. That's how I'm able to do all the things that I do. And there is a difference between me waking up early, having my cup of coffee that is especially brewed by beans that we order because that's my husband and I's one vice. So we drink expensive coffee. And I take it in my favorite mug and I sit out on my porch and I feel the sunlight on my face and I listen to all the different birds and I start my day like that. What I often do instead is make my coffee while I'm making the kids' lunches, while I'm running them out the door to get on the bus. By the time I go back to it, it's cold. I've already spilled half of it. And it's the same act, right? Both things are the same, but it's a different intention that I'm bringing to it. And so that's what I mean by the habit stacking. We can take things that we are already doing and really just approaching it with a level of mindfulness that's going to set us up for really a different output than when have my cold coffee that is spilled all over the car. So that would be one thing. Think about what are you already doing in your life that you can say, I'm going to be more purposeful here. I'm going to notice this. I'm not going to be scrolling on my phone, while I'm drinking my coffee. Or something else I was telling people is something as simple as like if you when you're washing your hands, after going to the bathroom, you say a short prayer, as you're washing your hands, because something you're doing already, and you can lean into it more to make it a spiritual practice. So you can make anything you want a spiritual practice. It's not an hour-long meditative practice that only is the thing that counts. And another practice that I have recommended to people and people have enjoyed is I would say I call it the micro joy or micro gratitude practice. So think of it depending on what you're finding you're needing more in your life. Sometimes people need more joy, sometimes people need more gratitude, whatever it is. But each day, identifying three small things that you are grateful for in the day. And I'm not talking about everyone, when you ask people what they're grateful for, they're going to say, oh, my family, my health, my house. Those are all good things. We know you're grateful for those things. I am saying very, very small things. That's what I want you to focus on, like hyper focus on the small things in your life. And I do recommend writing them down. And there's like some apps and things you can do that for. Um, but it could be something as simple as, this cucumber water that I'm drinking is just so cold and so refreshing on a hot day. So my one thing that I'm naming of gratitude might be this cucumber water. Or it might be the fact that my child set the table today without asking. Normally there's a whole, back and forth, but today he did it. Or it could be that, I managed to, fold the laundry. Right. So that's what I mean by very granular parts of your day, because that over time will build. And sometimes it's a struggle to come up with the three, and sometimes they're right there. But what it does is it opens up our mind and our spirit to see those things throughout the day. So I recommend doing it at the end of the day, but there may be moments where you're seeing it, or you might think, oh, I got to remember this for later. This is going to be my thing that I'm grateful for today. So I think that can help us to be more present in our daily lives.
Yes, it is the little things, right? Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, okay, I'm grateful that, I don't have puffy eyes in the morning time.
Oh, I
From
need to
the-
know your secrets because I always have the puffy eyes, but
Oh yeah. So like little things like that, but with a lot of salt sometimes, depending because I cook a lot too. And sometimes I there's like, for example, there was this seasoning, it was like lemon pepper, but it already had salt in it. I didn't know, so I had added more salt on top of that. Anyway, so
well, but that's also a spiritual practice. A lot of people cooking is very meditative and you have to be present to what you're doing. And then even afterwards, as you're tasting it, you're noticing things like that right there can be a spiritual practice in and of itself.
yes, because people always think, oh, I have to meditate for an hour. It's like,
Mhm.
who said a meditation could just be stepping away from your desk and taking just one big deep breath?
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Mm-hmm.
just pausing and getting that noise, out of your head because we have so much noise in there. It's like, shush, shush.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just take a moment to ourselves. I notice that when I'm having those moments to myself, I feel so much better. Like I feel connected to myself more. But it's when I'm constantly on the go, 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 go. It's like, okay, no, slow down. What are you doing? It's not that important. It's not that serious. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Things
Mm-hmm.
can wait. My thing about overwhelm is, okay, step away, take a deep breath, write down what's the most priority items on your list, and then circle which ones you need to tackle first, and then that's it. And then little by little, not like I have to do all of these things, but just taking a moment for yourself and just chilling out, and naps are okay too. People are like, "Oh, are naps okay?" I'm like, "Yes, your body needs to
It's
rest."
resting,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think what you're speaking for is so central to women,
Yeah.
and in our society where we're also, you know, told we have to be productive and we have to do all of the things and care for all the people. Yeah, so a lot of what we're, talking about too is around self-care. It is, prioritizing our own needs and our own wellness, knowing that the work will still be there. But it's the way that we are approaching it that we can change.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-care is so important. I want to shift a little bit and talk a little bit about grief and loss
Mhm.
because I'm gonna be honest, I've lost like 5 family members this last month in July, and
Mm.
it's just been one huge roller coaster. I've had to cancel podcasts, I've
Oh.
had to take some time, and I had to fly out to Florida to do a speaking at TEDx, and this was a time I'm like, no, I can't do this right now. This is where I
Oh.
definitely needed the Lord because it was just too much for
Hmm.
me. Could you talk about some healthy ways to cope with loss and grief, and how do you support someone going through such experiences?
Yeah. Oh, well, and thank you for sharing about your experiences and the hardship of it. I think that is one of the first things that you can do, right? Is to let people know that you're suffering. And I think you sharing about this normalizes it for other people because we are in a society where we don't talk a lot
Mm,
about grief and loss and death. It's seen as a taboo topic or something that you should get over. You have 3 days off of work and then that's it.
yeah.
And nobody wants to bring it up because even if they are well intentioned, they're afraid that, oh, if I say something to Gina about this, it's going to make her feel worse. When often that is not the case, right? It's really about acknowledging what a person went through. So I always encourage people on the other side, friends and family, to check in with their friend or family member that they know is going through a loss or a death, as you said. And I say, don't just check in the moment that it happens, but check in 3 weeks after, 6 weeks after, 12 weeks after, because initially there is the logistics of the funeral. There's all of the rituals that we have that they're going to be going through. And that's when there's a huge outpouring of support. But it's later on. When the isolation can really hit in, when everyone else has kind of gone back to their normal and your normal has changed forever. So that is one thing that I recommend doing. I also recommend that people listen more than they speak when they are with someone who is bereaved or recently bereaved, because often nothing that we say is going to make it better. There's plenty that we say that will make it worse, which is often what I talk about. Don't say things like, oh, God needed another angel, or, they're in a better place now. These things, we may say them, and I've said them in the past before I knew better, from a place of trying to help the other person, but it can actually cause some spiritual harm because if I'm told that God needed another angel and that's why they took my loved one, well, I'm going to think that God's a jerk. Right. And so it's about putting your spirituality onto someone else in a way that is not helpful. And then for the person that's going through the loss and the grief, I think the first thing to know is that you are going to have a variety of emotional responses. And a lot of it depends on your relationship with the individual, right? So if I, you know, lost my grandfather and we weren't that close, it may not hurt me as much as if my neighbor dies and we were very close, right? So even though, the family, the relationship is there, it's totally dependent on the depth of the relationship. And so sometimes the families of the patients that I work with, they're also surprised when there's relief at a death because they've watched their loved one suffer for so long that death is actually a relief from the pain that they watched them go through. And so that's another one I like to normalize to say, no, it's not, you don't have to feel guilty for that. Um, of course, there's going to be a lot of sorrow, there's going to be a lot of anger. Sometimes there is some joy as well that can come. So, a lot of times when I'm talking with people who are uh, mourning and in grief, they'll feel bad that they laughed at a joke or something and they see that as a betrayal. I say, no, 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 it's all a part of the experience. The other piece that I like to highlight for individuals is that a lot of people know about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stage theory, right, of all the stages to go through. Well, she actually talked about it later on. She's like, these are not sequential stages, right? This was to give some framework, but just because you went through this one, you're not going to go through this one. It's not a linear process.
Mhm.
It's much more jumbled up than that. And so I think that that is also helpful for people to know. And it's not something that we ever get over. We don't move on from grief or get over it. We move through it and we move with it, and it changes us. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. But a lot of what it takes is that patience. And so, to you going through this, I would say be gentle with yourself as you are suffering all of these losses. And what you've had so many in a short amount of time, we would call that compounded losses, right? So, one death is hard enough, but to have five is a lot. And that's going to make all of them more exacerbated. So it will take time for you to listen to yourself, to be patient, to be gentle, and to reach out to others for help.
Absolutely. I noticed I caught myself a lot doing a deep breathing because, and I just was just hurting so much, and I felt like it needed to come all out. And I know my husband took the
Mhm.
kids, and he went away, and I was finally able to just to kind of grieve by myself because I don't really,
Mm.
I feel a little bit uncomfortable grieving in front of people, and I know perhaps I shouldn't. I don't know, but for me, I feel much better when I'm by myself and just letting it out because I feel like I can then talk to God out loud, saying,
Mm.
"Please help me, comfort me during this time."
Mm.
I know the spirit is alive, but it just sucks not having them there here on earth, and I know I'll
Yeah.
probably reunite with them sometime with our spirits in a different lifetime or somewhere else, who knows? But it just sucks not having them there. And then for my
Mm.
aunt who lost her son, youngest son, who's my cousin, all I can do is just give her a hug and say, "I love you." I
Mm.
didn't know what you sometimes I just don't know what to say. And like
No, that's perfect. That's all you can say.
and all my energy, like even with my uncle who's my godfather, to my aunt, his wife, all I can say is like, "I love you," and just give her a
Mm.
embrace that hug. I think that energy exchange is definitely needed to feel that warmth and embrace and that to feel that love. Because words,
Mhm.
like you said, I may say something wrong. It may not sit with them
Mhm.
well. Like you said, oh, God is needing another eight.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell people the best thing you can do is show up and shut up. Right? And you
Oh,
did
I
that. You
love that.
focused on I love you and you did the hug. Like that is the thing to do. Yeah, it's so hard in the moment. And the other piece that you were talking about before too, being alone, right? This is where it's going to be different for everyone. Some people want to be alone, some people want to be with other people. And the other part that you spoke about that's worth normalizing is how much grief can be an embodied experience, right? So you talk about the feeling of the hug, but also the tears flowing. I've known people that are vomiting the moment they get the news of a loved one's death. The fatigue and the exhaustion is very real. So some people sleep a lot, some people can't sleep at all. I think all of that is at play in grief, and it can really drive people up the wall because they don't expect that. And then to have to navigate those physical challenges at the same time that they're navigating the emotional challenges can be quite overwhelming.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now you, yeah, I mean, being a chaplain, I mean, you've experienced all of this, right? How are you able to like just be empathetic and then listen to what families have to say? How do you go through that?
Yeah, it is a tough job. I will say that, but it is also this really profound honor and privilege to get to be with people when they're at their most vulnerable, on the worst day of their lives. It really puts everything into perspective very quickly. And their grief is not my grief, right? So for them, the worst thing that's ever happened. And I understand that. For me, it's a Tuesday. Like I'm used to this all day long. And so as much as I do try to be very empathetic, there is a disconnection. Occasionally I do know the person or I know the family involved, and that brings another layer to it. But it's really about seeing um, just that I can make it a little bit better, like 1% better just by being there. That helps me to do it. And then I have lots of, my own self-care modalities that I'm trying to practice on my own so that I can continue to do this work and, do the work of spiritual direction, do the work of being a mom, all of the things. That is a big part of it is caring for ourselves, having that time that you had to grieve by yourself so that, you could kind of re-enter society and be there for your aunt or be there, for your family.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, I feel like I can talk to you about this topic forever. But for our audience who are wanting to then go ahead and connect with you and just want to reach out to you if they have questions, how can they do so?
Absolutely. So my website's probably the best place. It's christinevdavies.com. I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook and all of those things. They can find me there. And I do write about once a week, sometimes once every other week newsletter on Substack where I'm talking about different spiritual practices, different things as it relates to grief and loss, sharing stories from the hospital. So they can sign up for that either on my website or my Substack page, and the newsletter will get emailed to them.
Beautiful. And I will have everything in the show notes. But Christine, is there any last thoughts or words you would like to share with our audience today?
Well, thank you so much for having me here. And I think what I would leave you all with is to, take spiritual stock of yourselves, of your connection with yourself, your connection with others, your connection with the divine, however you see that in your life. And just look and see, okay, where am I feeling especially connected? And where is there an invitation for more connection? And use that to give you momentum going forward.
Beautiful. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation, and I feel like I have a little bit more enlightenment on this topic here. It's wonderful. So thank you so much for being on my show. It's been an honor.
Oh, yes, you're very welcome. I've enjoyed being with you.